In this lesson, we're continuing our discussion of criminal capacity. Specifically, we're going to focus on the defense of intoxication. So, big picture, we probably all know what intoxication is, how a person acts when they are intoxicated, the different impacts and effects this can have on a person. We probably are all aware of, but just to have a definition for us to work with, right? Intoxication is a disturbance of mental or physical capacities resulting from introduction of any substance into the body. The operative word here being any, right? Oftentimes when we're thinking about intoxication, most people probably think about a person drinking too much alcohol and becoming intoxicated. And certainly this is one way of many ways that a person can become intoxicated. But for purposes of the defense of intoxication, any substance, right, that enters the body and causes this disturbance in mental or physical capacities is going to be considered an intoxicant, right, for our intoxication purposes. So this could be legal drugs, illegal drugs, right, you name it. Any substance that's affecting the body in this way, causing mental or physical disturbances, right, we can think of as intoxication. Okay, so not just limited to alcohol, not just limited to legal or illegal substances. We're talking about any substance that's entering the body that results in mental or physical disturbances. Okay, and so we're thinking about intoxication as a defense, right? There's really three questions, three issues we need to keep in mind. Number one, how did the defendant become intoxicated? Primarily, was this voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication? Our next issue is going to be, in what way does the defendant claim that his intoxication affected his culpability, right? Is he claiming that the intoxication negated the mens rea requirement, the actus reus requirement? Is he claiming some form of temporary insanity, right? We need to know how the defendant is asserting this intoxication defense. And finally, we need to know what type of crime the defendant is charged with. Is this a specific intent crime, a general intent crime, a malice crime, or a strict liability crime? We'll see the application of intoxication can vary depending on the type of crime the defendant has been charged with. So let's just go through each of these issues and work through some examples to see how it plays out. So question number one, how did the defendant become intoxicated? Was it voluntary or involuntary, right? And just as a big picture rule, right, it should be fairly intuitive. The law is generally going to be more sympathetic toward involuntary intoxication as opposed to voluntary intoxication. But we say voluntary intoxication occurs when a person knowingly ingests a substance that he knows or should know can cause him to become intoxicated unless the substance was a prescribed medication or he was coerced to ingest it. Okay, so let's just go through some classic recurrent fact patterns and discuss whether it's voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication. Right, so if a person goes to a bar and orders 20 shots of vodka and is slamming those vodka shots, right, and then gets really drunk, is that voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication? Clearly, right, that's voluntary intoxication. Our defendant is knowingly ingesting a substance that he knows or should know can cause him to become intoxicated, right, alcohol. The substance was not prescribed by a doctor, he's not being coerced to do this, he's just drinking the shots on his own volition at the bar. Your most classic example of voluntary intoxication. Right, let's say that a doctor prescribes our defendant a type of narcotic, right? Let's say Vicodin, and the doctor tells the defendant you are supposed to take 2 pills of Vicodin every 6 hours, right? That's the maximum dose. And let's say that our defendant takes 2 pills of Vicodin exactly as prescribed and becomes very intoxicated, right? Is that voluntary or involuntary intoxication, right? That would not be voluntary intoxication because the substance was prescribed, right? We have a medication that was prescribed by a doctor. Taking that medication, right, if he has some adverse reaction, we're going to consider that involuntary intoxication, because really the defendant there would have had no way to know that he would become that intoxicated if the doctor's telling him otherwise. Right, now let's say though, same fact pattern, doctor prescribes 2 pills of Vicodin are to be taken every 6 hours. Right, and the defendant gets home, the defendant takes 20 pills of Vicodin and gets really intoxicated. Would that be voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication? Right, that would be voluntary intoxication. Even though he was prescribed the medication, exceeding the dose goes beyond the scope of the prescription. That would be involuntary medication, right? You should know taking way more than what you're prescribed, or taking anything more than what you're prescribed, would cause you to become intoxicated. That's voluntary intoxication. Right, what if we have a defendant who is a student, right? He's in college and he wants to join a fraternity. So in the process, he's being hazed. Let's say that our student, our defendant, is put by his potential fraternity brothers into a closet, right? And the fraternity brothers tell him that he is not allowed to leave the closet until he drinks a full bottle of vodka, right? And so they leave him with the vodka and they lock the closet. Let's say the defendant drinks the bottle of vodka, the whole thing, and gets very intoxicated, right? Is that voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication? Well, even though the college fraternity student, our defendant, would know or have reason to know that drinking a full bottle of vodka would make him intoxicated, he was coerced to ingest it, right? He was under duress. He was locked in a closet, told he couldn't leave until he finished the bottle of vodka. Because he was coerced to ingest the vodka, we would say that's involuntary intoxication. All right, one more example, right? I'm just going through all the recurrent fact patterns here that you might see tested. Right, let's say that we have a defendant at a party, right? And he is given marijuana to smoke, and he's told by somebody, hey, we got some marijuana, do you want to smoke this? And he says, yeah, sure. He smokes the marijuana. Unbeknownst to the defendant, the marijuana is laced with PCP, right? And so he gets very intoxicated unexpectedly from the PCP, right? Is that voluntary intoxication or involuntary intoxication? Well, in that case, courts have ruled on this issue. The idea is that street drugs like marijuana that are not prescribed by a doctor, right, do not come with warranties. You are accepting the risk when you smoke marijuana that was obtained illegally, that marijuana might have an issue, right? There might be some problem. It might be laced with something dangerous, right? So for that reason, you may not have known, but you should have known that could cause you to become intoxicated. We would say that's voluntary intoxication. Even though the defendant didn't know the marijuana was laced with PCP, because the marijuana was obtained illegally, right, the court is going to say, look, no warranties come with that. You assume the risk when you smoke illegal, obtained, street drugs, that it could be laced with something more dangerous. You should have known that can cause you to become intoxicated. For that reason, it's voluntary intoxication. Okay? The last example would be basically when a person gets poisoned. That would obviously be involuntary intoxication, right? Somebody slips something into the defendant's drink at a bar, and the defendant doesn't know that there's something in the drink and consumes it, ingests it, and then becomes intoxicated, right? That would be unknowingly ingesting the substance. That would be involuntary intoxication. Okay, I think that's all the different combinations of kind of recurrent fact patterns for this first issue. But we always want to know, was the intoxication voluntary or involuntary? And we'll start to see why as we get to question number 2. Right, so the next issue is going to be, in what way does the defendant claim that his intoxication affected his culpability? Basically, how is he asserting this defense, right? And we'll see there's really 3 main ways the defendant asserts an intoxication defense, right? The defendant might claim that his intoxication negated the mens rea requirement. The defendant might claim that the intoxication negated the actus reus requirement of the crime. And in some cases, the defendant might even claim that the intoxication resulted in a temporary form of insanity, right? That He was so intoxicated he couldn't tell right from wrong or conform his conduct to the requirements of the law due to his intoxication, right? He's trying to claim a form of temporary insanity, right? Well, most of the time, when the defendant is raising an intoxication defense, he's doing it to claim that it negated the mens rea requirement. This would be the most classic application of intoxication. A person is saying, hey, look, I couldn't have formed the intent, the mens rea requirement needed for this crime because of how drunk I was, how intoxicated I was. Right? And we'll talk about how we handle that when we get to question number 3. So let's just put a pause on that, but we can discuss the Actus Reus requirement and this concept of temporary insanity pretty quickly right here. But we'll come back to mens rea when we get to question number 3, because we'll see it depends on the type of crime the defendant has been charged with. But we can cover Actus Reus and temporary insanity. So what if the defendant is claiming that the intoxication negated an Actus Reus requirement of the crime? Right, let's say that the defendant is claiming, right, well, let's just say the defendant goes to the bar, gets very intoxicated, right, under his own volition. So we have voluntary intoxication, right, and he's operating a car. He's driving his car home, and he becomes incapacitated due to the intoxication, right? He goes unconscious while he's driving the car. This makes the car go off the road, right? He loses control because he's unconscious, and he hits somebody and kills somebody, right? And say he's eventually charged with murder, right? Well, if he's charged, or manslaughter, doesn't matter, right? He's charged with some sort of crime. Can he claim that because he was unconscious, there was no voluntary physical bodily movements here? We know that in most cases, the prosecution rather, is going to have the burden of proving the Actus Reus requirement, right? That there was a voluntary physical bodily movement. Well, if the defendant tries to claim, hey, look, I was so intoxicated, I couldn't make any voluntary physical bodily movements, right? Because of the amount of alcohol I consumed, I became unconscious. I couldn't satisfy the Actus Reus requirement for this crime. That's not going to work for voluntary intoxication. If the intoxication was voluntary, the defendant cannot use that to negate the Actus Reus requirement of a crime. The prosecution is going to be allowed to go back in time to the last, right, voluntary bodily physical movement. They'll just say, well, sure, maybe at that exact moment, but if we go back in time to when you were starting the key of the ignition of the car while you were really drunk, if that was a voluntary physical bodily movement, and that'll be enough to satisfy the Actus Reus requirement. The prosecution will just be allowed to go back in time a little bit to satisfy the Actus Reus requirement if the intoxication was voluntary. If the intoxication was involuntary, right? Somebody slips something in the defendant's drink at the bar, something that, like a sleeping pill, right? Lots of sleeping pills in the defendant's drink while he's at dinner, and the defendant doesn't know this, and the defendant gets in the car, and then he becomes unconscious and hits somebody. Well, of course, then in that situation, it could be used to negate the Actus Reus requirement if it was involuntary intoxication, right? So what about temporary insanity? What if the defendant is claiming that due to the intoxication, he was unable to tell right from wrong or to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law? Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.